Okay, so let's continue our discussion of these locusts that have been released from the abyss. Verse 7, the appearance of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads appeared to be crowns like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots, of many horses rushing to battle. You hear a lot of the word, use the word like here, a lot of similes in these couple of verses here, 3 verses looks like, that John is describing all of this. So they're not men, and they don't have women's hair. They have hair like a woman. They have teeth like that of a lion. And some have speculated, let's go on to verse 10. They have tails like scorpions and stings, and in their tails is the power to hurt men for 5 months. Now, some people have interpreted this. Now, some of my early studies in Bible prophecy when I was just in my early teens is that this is John's effort to describe modern era military technology using first century terminology, because he didn't have the ability to describe, an attack helicopter or something of that nature. I don't know if I agree with that. I did for a long time, but I'm really thinking now that this description is so specific and it is so unique that it seems like we're describing some demonic, supernatural type forces here instead of military technology. Of course, I could be wrong about that, but that's the way I'm leaning here, is that these things, because they come out of the abyss for one thing, right? And so the abyss is where these angels have been bound. If you really want to do a deep dive study in this, and I encourage you to do it, it's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do here. We've already gone down so many rabbit trails, but do a deep dive study of Genesis chapter 6, when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they came into them and had children by them, took them as wives, and that was the Nephilim, the giants that roamed the earth in those days. And you can cross-reference that into the book of Jude. You can cross-reference it with 2 Peter and the book of Enoch, which is not part of our canon, but has some really interesting things in it about these angels that fell into a specific type of sin and were bound in chains of darkness. So that could very well be what these locusts are that are being released from the abyss by this angel, the star that had fallen and was given the key. That's the way I'm leaning here. Now, we're pretty confident they're not natural locusts for a number of reasons. We know, but natural locusts do have the appearance of armor, right? If you look at them up close, they have, very hard exoskeletons there that look like plated armor. And when they come in a swarm, their wings are extraordinarily loud and are quite terrifying if you have a locust swarm. And what we also learn from this passage is that apparently there's at least 5 months left in the Great Tribulation at this point, because they're given the power to torment men for 5 months. So there must be at least 5 months more, and there may be more than 5 months, but it seems like that may be a minimum in trying to make sense of an eschatological timeline here of this last time period, the 3.5 years particularly that Jesus referred to as the Great Tribulation. Verse 11, they have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek, he has the name Apollyon. Now, this is interesting on so many levels. Could this be the same angel from verse 1 who's given the key to the abyss, right? He was a star that had fallen from heaven to the earth. I'm leaning toward that being Satan, but I don't know for sure. And he's given the key, he opens up the abyss, he unleashes these fallen angels that had been bound there. John's seeing them in the supernatural, and he's describing them as locusts, the best way he has of describing them, with some really interesting physical characteristics. So is this the same, is the king over them, the angel of the abyss? Is it Satan? Is it the angel that was given the key to the abyss, or is it one of them coming up out of the abyss? At least the English translation here does not make it clear. May need to do a deeper dive into the Greek to see if we come up with any clarification. Y'all can do that as homework. But at any rate, it invites that question. And we know that Abaddon is associated with Sheol, or Hades in the Greek, the place of the dead, and death. And that takes us all the way back to Revelation chapter 6, when we had the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And you remember the rider on the green horse? The rider on the green horse was death, and Hades followed. Some translations will say hell, but it really is properly translated Hades, the place of the dead, follow close behind. So we may see a reference here back to the rider on the green horse. The name Apollyon, more of a Greek name, means destroyer. And it's a derivation of Apollo. And if you want to go back and again do another deep dive rabbit trail study on the pantheon of the Greek gods, and you can translate them and track their history later on when they became the gods of the Roman mythology. You can go backwards in time to the Egyptians and the Babylonians and see that these very well may be a reference to these various fallen angels that we can find throughout some of the mythological traditions of other cultures, all originating there in Babylon, which is going to be a centerpiece of our study here, interestingly enough. Those of you that are tracking this kind of stuff may also be familiar with CERN, which is the particle accelerator that's there in Sweden, I believe, and supposedly it is built around the site where there was a temple to Apollo, and there may be some cross-referencing there as in terms of some of the technology, the human technology, and maybe it's not human technology, but the technology that humans are participating in the current age. I don't know, but it leads to a lot of speculation, a lot of rabbit trails, but I encourage you to be up to speed on some of this. The fact that these locusts have a king pretty much nails it that these are not natural locusts, because locusts don't have a king. We know that from Proverbs. The locusts have no king, yet all of them go out in ranks. And I find this to be interesting. You know, if we're looking at the Old Testament, and you know we didn't have the book of Revelation yet, maybe we're in Old Testament times, and we're reading this, you got to be thinking, why would God put such an obscure passage such as this in the Holy Scripture? And it may be to reveal these very types of things to us as we get closer to the latter days, to give us clues as well as to give us hope. Look at Romans chapter 15. For whatever was written in earlier times, probably a reference to the Old Testament Scripture, was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. The book of Revelation, as frightening as it can be at times, I think really is to give us hope. We know how it turns out. We know how this story ends. Let's look at verse 12 back in our text. The first woe is past. That would be the fifth trumpet. Behold, two woes are still coming after these things. Then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar. That's coming up again, which is before God. One saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So we had the seven angels with the seven trumpets. We had the eighth angel, remember, that was at the altar, that took fire from the altar and into a censer and threw it down to the earth. And now we got these four angels who, according to this, are bound at the great river Euphrates. Now, keep in mind of what's going on at the altar that's in heaven. Who was under the altar? These are the martyrs, right? These are the martyred saints that are crying out for vengeance. And we were told to wait a little while longer. And we see in chapter 8 with these seven trumpet judgments, we see the process of God's wrath, his taking vengeance on the earth dwellers on behalf of the martyrs who were killed for their faith. We see this process beginning, and here we have another reference to that altar and instructions given to the sixth angel to release the four angels who are at the river Euphrates. So I think this is another aspect of God answering the martyr's plea for vengeance. Now, the Greek word used here for bound, it can mean they're restrained against their will. So these could be, evil angels, fallen angels, for whatever reason, are bound at the river Euphrates, and they're going to be turned loose to conduct their devilment on mankind at this time. But it could also mean that they are duty bound, right? Like being bound by an oath of some type, being bound by duty. And so it could very well be that these are good angels that are bound by an oath, bound by duty to be there at the river Euphrates for just this moment in time. We don't know. It could mean either one. And I find this interesting. I was in Afghanistan for 3 years, helping with the police reform effort there, and I was leading a Bible study at one of our State Department base camps. And really interesting experience. A lot of international Christians that were there from all over the world. It was a fantastic opportunity. And we were doing a study on Revelation that I was leading. I was doing the research on it, and I was reading about the book about the Euphrates River, and it wasn't all that far from where we were located there in Afghanistan, certainly in that general part of the world. And I started I pulled up Google Maps and I just kind of started running down, tracing the path of the Euphrates River. And I saw that at the point where it begins to empty into the Persian Gulf, there is an island there named Abaddon, interestingly enough. Slightly different wording, but I think the pronunciation would be very similar. But there's an island there, and I found that to be very interesting because the Euphrates figures so prominently in eschatology as it is here. And we also know that the Euphrates River ran right smack dab through the center of the ancient city of Babylon. And there were metal gates that opened to allow ships in and to close them out. And you may remember from a historical perspective that Cyrus the Great, the Persian ruler, was going after the city of Babylon to capture it, and was successful in doing so. And the way he did it was by taking his military engineers and detouring diverting is the word I'm looking for, diverting the river, the water from the river Euphrates upstream, which caused the water level to drop where these gates are, and the men were able to walk right. They waded beneath the walls of Babylon and took it almost without firing a shot. That's a joke because they didn't have guns. But the idea of very little bloodshed, and you can read all about that in Daniel chapter 5, by the way, where Belteshazzar is there, and Daniel comes in, and the disembodied hand does the writing on the wall. That's all recorded for us in Daniel 5. And then there's lots of extra biblical sources that give us some of the other details. But again, Euphrates is figuring it. There's just a common web that just ties all this stuff together as we look at the end times. Now, some people have speculated that maybe this island is the entrance to the abyss. I don't know about that. That's highly speculative, but it's an interesting thing to be aware of for whatever reason. All right, verse 15. And the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released so that they would kill a third of mankind. So we're still seen to be in this judgment of the third. So we don't know how many people are going to be alive at this point in all of this. There's been a lot of destruction leading up to now, or to this time period of the sixth trumpet. But however many are left, they're given the authority to kill a third of mankind. And that's probably a good place for us to stop in this segment. We're going to pick up on the other side. We'll talk about how many, we're talking about the invading army, the kings of the east are going to come across the dried up Euphrates River, and we'll talk about that and who might they be and how many of them there are on the other side.